Hello friends, if someone had told me a year ago that I would be sitting here, broken, questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our marriage, I would have laughed in their face. Because for the longest time, I believed in us. I believed in her. I believed that what we had was solid, unshakable, built on trust, on love, on something real. But now, after everything I've been through, I realize that I was a fool. That I was blind. That I had spent years trusting someone who never really deserved it. Her name is Lily. We've been married for 7 years, together for 10. I met her at a friend's party back when we were both in our 20s. She had this energy, this way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room when she talked to them. I fell hard, fast. I was the quiet, logical type, the one who overthought everything, while she was spontaneous, full of life, the kind of person who could convince you to drive 2 hours just to watch a sunset because she thought it would be fun. Maybe that's what drew me in. She made life feel exciting, unpredictable. And for the longest time, I thought that was a good thing. Our marriage wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but I never imagined she would betray me like this. I never imagined that the woman I built a life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, would destroy everything with lies, with deception, with another man. The worst part? I didn't see it coming. Not at first. Looking back, I can see the signs now, the moments that should have made me stop and question things. But at the time, I didn't think twice. I was too comfortable. Too sure of her. It started small. Tiny things that, on their own, didn't seem like much. She started coming home later than usual, saying she had to run errands or meet up with a friend. I didn't question it. Lily had always valued her independence, and I never wanted to be the kind of husband who kept tabs on his wife. But then it started happening more often. Then there was the way she started looking at her phone. She used to leave it on the counter, on the table, unlocked, without a second thought. But suddenly, it was always in her hand, always on silent, always turned face down whenever she set it down. She would pick it up and smile at something, a flicker of amusement crossing her face before she quickly put it away. If I asked what was so funny, she would shrug it off. Just a stupid meme, she would say, or just a message from work. But she never showed me that I still didn't suspect anything. Then came the car rides. Lily never used taxis before. She always drove herself or used rideshare apps when she had a few drinks. But one night, she told me she had taken a taxi home. It struck me as odd, but I let it go. Then it happened again. And again. I joked once, asking if she had become best friends with a taxi driver. She just laughed it off. It's just easier, she said, but something felt off. One night, she came home later than usual. I was already in bed, but I heard the front door close, heard her heels clicking against the floor. She walked into the bedroom, and for a moment, I just watched her. Her hair was messy, her lipstick slightly smudged. She had this distant look in her eyes, like she was somewhere else. That I asked her how her night was. She hesitated just for a second before smiling. Great, she said. We just had a few drinks. Nothing crazy. And that should have been enough for me. That should have been the moment where I knew. But I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that I was reading too much into it, because I still trusted her. That I still believed in our marriage. That I still believed in her. But that was the night something changed in me. That was the night I started watching more closely. That was the night I started realizing that the woman I loved was not the woman I thought she was, and soon, I would learn the truth. The night Lily came home late stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. It wasn't just her appearance, the smudged lipstick, or the distant look in her eyes. It was the hesitation before she answered me, the way she paused for just a fraction of a second before she smiled and said everything was fine. That hesitation was small, almost unnoticeable, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My mind latched onto it like a warning, like a signal that something wasn't right. I told myself I was overthinking, that I had no reason to doubt her, but no matter how many times I tried to push it away, the feeling stayed. It followed me like a shadow. Lily's behavior didn't change immediately after that night, but I noticed things that I hadn't before. The way she checked her phone the second it vibrated, even when she was mid-conversation with me. The way she would turn her screen away just slightly, not enough to make it obvious, but enough that I knew she didn't want me seeing whatever was there. The way she always had an excuse for why she needed to go out, why she needed to stay out just a little later than usual. Errands. Drinks with a friend. Work running late. It was never the same excuse twice, but it was always something. Then there were the taxis. At first, I had laughed about it, joked that she had a personal driver now. But when I really thought about it, it didn't add up. Why was she taking taxis so often when she had a perfectly good car? Why was she avoiding rideshare apps, the ones she had always used before? I casually asked her about it one night, keeping my voice light, not wanting to seem like I was pressing too hard. She just smiled, shrugged, said it was easier this way. I nodded like that made sense, but deep down, something wasn't sitting right. That I started paying attention to the details. If she took a taxi, I checked the time she left and the time she got home. Sometimes, the numbers didn't add up. A 20-minute drive home would somehow take her 45 minutes. She would claim traffic was bad, that the driver had taken a long route. But the thing that made my stomach twist? The way she never let me see the receipt. Before, she used to complain about the costs, joke about how much she was spending on rides. Now, she never mentioned it. Never left any proof lying around. Like she didn't want me to know who was driving her home. One night, I decided to follow her. Not because I was convinced she was cheating, not yet. But because I needed to prove to myself that she wasn't. Because if I didn't, the thoughts would eat me alive. She had told me she was going to meet up with a friend. Some new coworker I had never met, a woman whose name I barely recognized. I waited until she left, gave her a 10-minute head start, then got in my car and followed. She didn't go to a bar. She didn't go to a restaurant. She didn't go anywhere near where she had said she was going. Instead, she got into a taxi just a few blocks away from our house that I parked far enough that she wouldn't see me, my pulse pounding in my ears as I watched. The driver got out to open the door for her, and that's when I saw the way she smiled at him. It wasn't polite. It wasn't casual. It was familiar. The way she tilted her head slightly, the way her fingers brushed against his arm as she stepped inside, the way he looked at her like she wasn't just another passenger. That I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just sat there, watching as the taxi drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew. Maybe I didn't have all the details yet. Maybe I didn't know how long it had been going on, how deep the betrayal ran. But I knew, and Lily had no idea that I had just seen her secret unravel right in front of me. I sat in my car for a long time after watching Lily step into that taxi. My mind kept looping through what I had just seen, trying to force myself to come up with an explanation that wasn't what I already knew in my gut. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe she really did know this guy from somewhere else, and it was nothing more than a friendly exchange. Maybe I had become so paranoid that I was seeing things that weren't there. But no matter how many excuses I tried to make for her, none of them could erase what I had just witnessed, that smile. That small, intimate touch. That look that passed between them. That I couldn't move. Couldn't react. Just sat there in the dim glow of the streetlights, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the spot where the taxi had been only moments before. The weight in my chest wasn't just anger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. Because I had spent months brushing aside every red flag, convincing myself that Lily would never do this to me. That the woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted, wasn't capable of this, but she was, and I had been blind. That I forced myself to drive home, my mind racing through the moments I had ignored, the things I had dismissed as unimportant. The sudden late nights. The way she had started pulling away from me, her body stiff when I touched her, her kisses feeling like an obligation rather than something she actually wanted. The way she never looked me in the eyes anymore, how she always seemed distracted, like she was somewhere else. Now, I knew where that somewhere was, and it wasn't with me that I made it back to the house before she did. I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the glow of the street lamp outside, waiting. I didn't know what I was planning to do. I didn't even know what I was going to say. A part of me wanted to confront her the second she walked through the door, to demand the truth, to force her to admit what I had just seen. But another part of me, a much colder, sharper part, told me to wait. Because if I confronted her now, she would have an excuse ready. She would lie. And I needed more than what I had. I needed proof. I needed something she couldn't talk her way out of. The sound of her key turning in the lock made my body tense. I stayed perfectly still as the door creaked open, as she stepped inside, the soft click of her heels on the floor sending a spike of anger through my chest. She didn't see me at first. She let out a quiet sigh, setting her purse down on the counter, slipping off her shoes. She looked happy. Relaxed. Like she had just come home from a perfect evening. Like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. That I cleared my throat. She jumped, spinning around, her eyes widening when she saw me sitting there in the dark. "Jesus, you scared me," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "What are you doing just sitting here?" I studied her, the way she was avoiding my eyes, the way she looked guilty but was trying to act like she wasn't. "Couldn't sleep," I said evenly, forcing my voice to sound normal. She nodded, shifting on her feet, and I watched as she debated something in her head. Whether she should ask me if I was okay. Whether she should tell me another lie. "I told you I was going out with Mia, right?" she said after a beat, her voice casual, too casual. "She just got this big promotion, so we were celebrating. I didn't want to wake you when I got home." Lied. That I could hear it in her voice, see it in the way she wasn't quite meeting my eyes. That I kept my expression neutral, nodding as if I believed her. "That's nice," I said, my voice smooth, steady. "Did you have fun?" She smiled, the kind of smile that was supposed to be reassuring, but all it did was make my stomach twist. "Yeah," she said. "It was good to catch up." I watched her for another moment, waiting for the guilt to show, for her to falter. But she didn't. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because this wasn't something new. This wasn't something she had just started doing. This was routine for her now. Lying to me. Going behind my back. Coming home after spending hours with him and looking me in the face like nothing had happened. That it made me feel sick. She moved past me, walking toward the stairs, and I stayed seated, listening to the quiet sound of her footsteps fading as she went to bed. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Because if I did, if I laid next to her in that bed now, I would lose it. I would let the anger take over, let it spill out before I had the chance to fully understand just how deep this betrayal went. Instead, I stayed in the living room. I needed a plan, because this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a one-time thing, this was my wife living a double life, and I wasn't going to be the fool in it anymore. I sat in that living room for hours after she went upstairs, my mind looping through everything that had led me to this moment. I could hear her movements above me, the way she casually went through her bedtime routine, the sound of the bathroom sink running, the light creak of our bed as she settled under the blankets. She was comfortable. Relaxed. Completely at ease in a house where she had spent months, maybe even years, lying to my face. The realization was suffocating. She was upstairs, sleeping soundly, while I sat here, drowning in the weight of everything she had done. That I had spent years believing we were solid, believing that our marriage was unshakable. That we had trust. That we had love. But now, all I could see were the cracks that had been there the entire time, the small details that I had brushed aside, the things I had convinced myself weren't worth questioning. The thought of climbing into bed beside her made my skin crawl. I couldn't do it. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I knew. So I stayed downstairs, letting the silence wrap around me, letting my mind dissect every moment I had ignored, every instance where she had played me for a fool. How long had this been going on? How many times had she left this house, smiling at me, kissing me goodbye, only to get into his car? How many times had she come home after being with him, lying to me without a second thought? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. If she was taking taxis as often as she claimed, there would be charges. There would be receipts. Something that would tell me just how long this had been happening. But when I scrolled through the transactions, I found nothing because she hadn't used our money, she was hiding it. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about secrecy. It wasn't just about the affair itself. It was the fact that she had thought ahead, had planned this out, had made sure there was no trace of what she was doing in the places I could easily check. This wasn't impulsive, this was calculated. I checked the time. It was late, but I wasn't going to sleep anyway. So I did something I had never done before. I picked up her purse, carefully, quietly, and unzipped the small inside pocket where she kept her extra cash. And there it was, a folded receipt. A taxi fare. Paid in cash. The date was from 3 months ago. I stared at it, my breath shallow, my fingers gripping the thin paper so tightly I thought I might tear it. 3 months. That was just one receipt. How many others had she thrown away before I ever got suspicious? How long had this actually been happening? I carefully put everything back the way it was, then sat down, trying to stop the fury from consuming me. I couldn't confront her yet. Not now. Not when I still didn't have enough to completely trap her in her own lies. She would deny it. She would gaslight me, turn the conversation in circles, make me feel like I was the one imagining things. She was good at lying. She was too good at it. So I waited. I played my part. Over the next few days, I acted normal. I kissed her before work. I asked about her day. I smiled when she smiled. And the whole time, I watched. I listened. And I collected evidence. She left the house at the usual times, always with some excuse: grocery shopping, grabbing coffee, running errands. But I noticed something. The times didn't add up. She would leave for a quick trip to the store but be gone for over an hour. She would say she was meeting a friend, but there were never texts, never calls, nothing to suggest that she was actually making plans with anyone. So one night, when she left to go for a drive and clear her head, I followed her. She didn't know. She had no idea that I was behind her, watching as she pulled into a parking lot a few blocks away. A taxi was already waiting, and it wasn't just any taxi. It was his. She got inside, moving fast, like they had done this 100 times before. And that's when it all became undeniable. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It wasn't just a gut feeling that my wife was having an affair, and now, I had proof. I could have driven after them. I could have confronted them right then and there. But I didn't. Because this wasn't going to be a fight. This wasn't going to be some dramatic showdown where she got the chance to cry and beg for forgiveness, to throw out some pathetic excuse about how she was unhappy, how it just happened, how she never meant to hurt me. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. I was going to let her destroy herself, and when I was ready, when I had everything I needed, I was going to walk away without looking back. I knew I couldn't let my emotions take over, not yet. The rage, the disgust, the humiliation, it was all there, boiling beneath the surface, threatening to break free, but I held it back because I needed more. More proof. More certainty. More control over how this ended. I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me. I wasn't going to let her twist reality, make excuses, play the victim, or cry her way out of what she had done. No, I needed her to be caught so thoroughly, so completely, that there was no escape, no weak attempts at damage control, no pathetic lies to grasp onto. I had to be smarter than her, had to move carefully, methodically, just like she had been doing behind my back. So, I waited. I followed her routine, memorized her patterns, tracked the days she would leave, the times she would disappear. I kept my distance, watching from afar, taking mental notes, absorbing every lie she told as if I were still the fool she thought I was. I let her kiss me goodbye in the mornings, let her hold on to the illusion that she was still in control of this game she was playing. I let her believe that I was clueless, oblivious, that I was still the trusting husband who had never once questioned her actions. But in reality, I was dissecting every word that came out of her mouth, calculating how much longer I would let this continue before I tore everything apart. The next time she took a taxi, I followed. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, kept my lights off when necessary, took different turns just to be sure she wasn't aware of me trailing her. She wasn't. She was too comfortable, too confident in the web of lies she had spun. That was her mistake. She thought she had covered her tracks, thought she had erased every clue, but she hadn't accounted for one thing: me paying attention. I had been blind before, yes, but now. Now, my eyes were open, and there was no closing them again. The taxi took her to a hotel. Not a fancy one, not some high-end place where discretion was guaranteed. No, it was one of those smaller, tucked-away hotels, the kind where no one asks questions, where no one cares who comes and goes. That told me something. It meant that they had done this enough times to know they didn't need luxury, didn't need anything more than a private room and an excuse. That realization hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just a stupid mistake or a moment of weakness. It was planned. Repeated. Deliberate. I parked a block away, close enough to keep an eye on the entrance but far enough that she wouldn't notice my car when she left. And then, I waited. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, my pulse steady, my mind locked onto one single thought: how long has this been going on? Was it weeks? Months? Years? How many nights had she told me she was out with friends while she was here? How many times had she come home to me, acting normal, sleeping next to me, kissing me, all while knowing she had been with someone else just hours before? I clenched my jaw, forcing the thought away. It didn't matter. However long it had been, it was over. 2 hours passed before she came out. 2 full hours. That was all I needed to know. She wasn't meeting him for a quick conversation. She wasn't just talking to him. She had spent 2 hours in a hotel room with another man, and now, she was stepping out like nothing had happened. Her hair was slightly messy, her expression light, her body relaxed. She had no guilt. None. No hesitation, no nervous glances, no careful steps like someone who had just done something unforgivable. She walked like a woman who had done this 100 times before, like a woman who had convinced herself that she deserved it, that whatever life she was living with me at home wasn't enough. The taxi driver was waiting for her. He was waiting for her. And the way he looked at her? It made my stomach turn. That wasn't the look of a man who had just picked up a passenger. That was the look of a man who knew her intimately, who had claimed something that didn't belong to him, who wasn't just a side character in my wife's life but a willing participant in the destruction of my marriage. I watched as she climbed into his car, as he leaned toward her, saying something that made her laugh. Laugh. That was what did it. That was what snapped something inside me. Because whatever he had said, whatever joke or flirtation had passed between them, she had reacted like a woman who had nothing to lose. And maybe, in her mind, she didn't. I followed them home. I stayed just far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, just out of reach, watching as they made their way back toward the life she shared with me. The house where I paid the bills, where I made sure she had everything she needed, where I had spent years thinking I was building something that mattered. It felt surreal, almost laughable, how easily she had compartmentalized it all. How she had lived 2 separate lives without hesitation. How she had stolen time from me without a single ounce of regret. She got home first. The taxi driver didn't linger. He didn't walk her inside, didn't kiss her goodbye. He simply drove away, off to wherever he went when he wasn't ruining marriages. And Lily? She walked inside as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just spent 2 hours in a hotel room with another man. I sat in my car, staring at the front door, my mind numb, my body buzzing with something cold, something dark. I could feel the anger clawing its way up, desperate to break free, to confront, to destroy, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. But I forced it down. Because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. I wasn't going to confront her now. I wasn't going to yell, to argue, to let her twist the story into something that wasn't true. No, I was going to make sure she had no way out. I was going to gather everything, and when the time was right, I was going to burn her entire world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, breathing steadily, peacefully, like she hadn't spent the evening in another man's arms. My body felt like it didn't belong to me, my thoughts like they were moving too fast and too slow at the same time. I could hear the soft rustle of the sheets as she shifted in her sleep, could feel the warmth of her body just inches away, and it made my stomach churn. How many nights had I laid beside her like this, blind to the truth? How many times had I kissed her goodnight while she was thinking about him? How many mornings had she woken up next to me with his scent still on her skin? The thought made my hands curl into fists beneath the blankets. She had no idea that I knew. And no idea that everything was about to fall apart. I forced myself to stay still, to regulate my breathing, to keep my movements natural. If she woke up and saw me lying there, staring at the ceiling, she might start asking questions. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to be in control of this. I needed to make sure that when everything unraveled, she didn't have a single way out. When morning came, I got up like I always did. I went through my routine like everything was normal, like my world hadn't been shattered into pieces. She kissed me on the cheek before heading to the shower, humming to herself like a woman without a care in the world, and I had to force myself to stay in place, to not react. To not grab her by the shoulders and demand to know why. Instead, I walked downstairs, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. My mind was a battlefield, my emotions tearing at each other, fighting for control. The urge to explode, to throw it all in her face, was there, but I couldn't give in to it. Not yet. That I needed more. So, I spent the next few days watching. Every time she left the house, I noted the time. Every time she took a taxi, I wrote it down. I started checking her phone when she was in the shower, when she left it unattended for just a few moments, looking for anything she hadn't deleted. She was careful, too careful, but she wasn't perfect. I found traces of conversations she had thought she had erased. Names that didn't belong to any of her real friends. Messages with no context, vague and meaningless on their own but obvious when put together. And then, I found the photos. They weren't anything explicit, nothing that could be considered proof on its own. But they were enough. A picture of a familiar car. A blurry shot of a hotel room. A photo of her reflection in a rearview mirror, smiling. That was the final confirmation. She wasn't just meeting him. She wasn't just seeing him occasionally. She was comfortable with him. She was living an entirely different life behind my back. I transferred everything I found to a USB drive and stored it somewhere safe. I recorded the details of every suspicious moment, every lie she told, every time she claimed she was somewhere she wasn't. I wasn't gathering this for revenge. I was gathering it to end this properly. To walk away with everything I needed to make sure she couldn't spin this in her favor. The hardest part was keeping up the act, sitting across from her at dinner and pretending I didn't know. Letting her kiss me before bed while knowing she had just been with him the night before. Answering her texts like nothing was wrong while knowing that as soon as I left the room, she was texting him too. Every moment felt like a lie. Every word she spoke was tainted, and yet, she had no idea that her time was running out. I moved through the next week like a ghost, present but detached, watching but never reacting. Every time Lily looked at me, I wondered if she could feel it, if she could sense the shift in me, the quiet storm building beneath the surface. I wasn't the same man she had been lying to all these months. I wasn't the fool she had been deceiving, the husband who blindly accepted her excuses. I was waiting. And when the moment came, I would end this on my terms. The thing about a liar is that they always think they are one step ahead. They believe they are the smartest person in the room, that they have covered every angle, hidden every loose end. But the moment they stop being careful, the moment they believe their secret is safe, they get sloppy. Lily had always been cautious, deleting messages, keeping her story straight, never giving me a direct reason to question her. But she had grown comfortable in her deception, and when people get comfortable, they make mistakes that I started noticing the little things first. A name on her phone that changed suddenly from Alyssa to Aaron, a last-minute change in her plans when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way she hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering my questions, as if she had to quickly decide which lie to tell me. These weren't things she would have done when she first started this affair. She had been careful back then. But now, she thought she was untouchable. She thought she had one evening, she left the house claiming she was meeting a coworker for dinner. I already knew where she was really going. I had been tracking the taxi driver's routine, learning the streets he frequently picked her up from, the locations they drove to together. She had no idea I was watching, that I had taken all of her secrets and used them against her. I left shortly after she did, following her at a distance, my hand steady on the wheel despite the fire burning in my chest that I knew exactly where she was headed before she even got there. The same hotel, the same corner of the city where no one would recognize her, where she could pretend to be someone she wasn't. I watched from a safe distance as she stepped out of the taxi, her movements easy, familiar, like she had done this 100 times before. And maybe she had. Maybe this had been going on even longer than I thought. That I clenched my jaw and waited. 2 hours later, she emerged, her hair slightly messier than before, her lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. The kind of smile she hadn't given me in a long time. And then he followed. The taxi driver. The man who had invaded my marriage, who had stolen what was supposed to be mine. He was too casual, too confident, like he didn't care that he was stepping out of a hotel room with someone else's wife. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the muscles in my jaw locked so tightly it hurt. I could confront them now. I could get out of the car, walk straight up to them, watch as Lily's face went from satisfaction to horror. But I didn't. Because that would be too easy. That would give her an out, a way to spin the story, to cry, to say it was a mistake. No, I needed to destroy the illusion she had built. That I followed her home again, watching as she walked into the house like nothing had happened. The audacity of it, the sheer disrespect, made my skin crawl. I parked down the street, inhaling slowly, controlling the urge to walk in after her and tear apart everything she had left in my life. Instead, I went to the one place I knew would give me what I needed, the hotel. It wasn't difficult to get the security footage. A little pressure, a few carefully chosen words, and I had exactly what I needed. There was no way for her to deny video proof. I had her walking in. I had him following. I had everything. That night, I barely spoke to her. She didn't notice. She was too caught up in whatever fantasy she had built for herself, too convinced that I was still the clueless, devoted husband she could keep in the dark. But she was wrong. That I wasn't in the dark anymore. The next morning, I left for work as usual, but I didn't go to the office. I went to see a lawyer. The divorce papers were drawn up quickly, efficiently. I wanted no negotiation, no discussion. I wanted out. I wanted her to lose everything she thought she had secured. And I wanted her to know that it was her own arrogance that had destroyed her. That evening, when I walked into the house, I didn't hesitate. I placed the folder with the divorce papers on the kitchen counter and waited. When she walked in, her usual fake smile appeared. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down, moving toward me like nothing had changed. That I didn't say a word. Her smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the folder on the counter. She frowned, stepping closer. "What's this?" I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, my face unreadable. "Open it." She hesitated. She knew, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Slowly, she reached for the folder, flipping it open. The room went silent, then, a sharp inhale, the color drained from her face. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents, her breath uneven. Her voice broke. She looked up at me, panic creeping into her features. You're filing for divorce? I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm, steady. What did you expect? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I watched as her mind scrambled, as she tried to find a way out. There was no crying. No immediate denial. Because she knew. She knew she was caught. But still, she tried. She shook her head, forcing out a weak laugh. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. I arched an eyebrow. Really? I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and let the video footage play. The color drained from her face completely, and that was it. No more lies, no more excuses, just silence. She swallowed hard, gripping the counter, her whole body stiff with the realization that she had lost. I exhaled slowly, the weight of months of deception finally lifting from my shoulders. I'll be staying somewhere else tonight, I said, my voice cool, detached. You have until the end of the week to pack your things and get out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're kicking me out of my own house? I let out a dry chuckle. Your house? I shook my head, grabbing my keys. Not anymore. And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing there, alone in the wreckage she had created. I didn't look back when I left the house. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind: a life built on lies, a woman who had betrayed everything we had, a marriage that had died long before I ever realized it. The weight in my chest didn't feel like grief. It didn't even feel like anger anymore. It felt like closure. The kind that comes when you finally see things for what they really are, when the illusions are stripped away, and all that's left is the truth. I checked into a hotel that night, sitting on the bed in the quiet of the room, staring at the divorce papers I had forced into her hands just hours ago. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in my head, thought about how it would feel, what I would say, what she would do. And yet, when it happened, it wasn't some explosive confrontation. It wasn't dramatic. It was empty. Because she had nothing left to say. There were no more lies she could tell, no more excuses she could throw at me, no way to manipulate the situation into something it wasn't. She had been caught completely, and she knew it. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering proof, making sure there wasn't a single way for her to twist the truth. But in the end, she didn't even try. She just stood there, staring at the video on my phone, her face draining of color, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I had expected her to fight, to cry, to beg. But she didn't. Maybe because she knew it wouldn't work. Maybe because she didn't care enough to try, and that was what stung the most. Not the betrayal itself, not even the lies. But the indifference. The fact that she had already made peace with throwing me away. I slept soundly that night for the first time in months. No tossing and turning, no waking up in a cold sweat wondering if I was imagining things, no fighting against the reality of what she had done. When I woke up, I felt lighter. I had lost my marriage, but I had gained something better: freedom. I didn't check my phone for messages from her. I didn't wonder if she would show up at the hotel, begging for another chance. I knew she wouldn't. Because in her mind, she had already moved on. Maybe she was calling the taxi driver that very moment, trying to figure out what her next step would be, scrambling to come up with a new plan. Maybe she was crying, maybe she wasn't. It didn't matter. She wasn't my problem anymore. By the end of the week, she was gone. I didn't go back to the house until I was sure of it, until I knew she had taken her things and left for good. When I walked through the door, the emptiness of the place hit me like a wave. Her clothes were gone from the closet. Her shoes weren't lined up by the door. The scent of her perfume no longer lingered in the air. It was just a house now, not a home, and I was fine with that. I spent the next few weeks in silence, adjusting to my new life. Friends reached out, some offering their sympathies, others wanting to know what happened. I didn't give them the full story. Not because I wanted to protect her, but because she wasn't worth the words. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let it be the thing that shaped the rest of my life. The divorce was finalized quicker than I expected. She didn't contest it, didn't fight for anything. She signed the papers like our marriage had never mattered in the first place. And maybe to her, it never did. Maybe I had just been a chapter she was waiting to close, but for me, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The day I walked out of that courthouse, papers in hand, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel loss. I felt relief, because I had escaped and I was never looking back.